Ryan and Sage, today we look at BYU's strict honor code. No drinking, no drugs, no premarital sex, no coffee, no tea, no cursing. To some Cougars, it makes the place special, but some feel the school enforces it selectively. That's ahead on Outside the Lines.
Right past his man, hands off Davies, and he dunks it! Davies throws it down!
On the eve of this year's NCAA tournament, BYU's Brandon Davies was kicked off the team for having premarital sex. On most campuses, it wouldn't have raised an eyebrow, but the honor code of Brigham Young University demands more of its students.
In that way, I'm very proud of the honors code, and I think it's a vital piece of the puzzle for BYU.
A vital piece that permeates the lives of every student.
Our religion is very much about minding your brothers, or being your brother's keeper, and everybody's keeping an eye on everybody else. For me, it was kind of like the KGB, sneaking around campus.
But some former athletes wonder whether the school enforces its code the same way for everyone.
Looking back, it's it's hard to pick out a whole bunch of Caucasian athletes who have been kicked out. All the ones that come to mind are Polynesian descent or African American descent.
The pride and peril of the BYU honor code. Ahead on Outside the Lines.
And now, sitting in for Bob Lee, T.J. Quinn.
Any religiously affiliated university that rises to the elite of college sports has to face a question that goes to its core values. Are you willing to compromise your principles to bring the best athletes to your school? At Brigham Young University, which is run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the school says it will not. Whether student athletes were raised as Mormons in Utah or were recruited from the Pacific Islands or cities across the United States, all are expected to adhere to the school's strict honor code. The code made national headlines when BYU suspended basketball star Brandon Davies from the team just before the NCAA tournament in March. But as Steve Delson shows us, some question whether the school applies that demanding standard to everyone who wears its uniform.
Brandon Davies comes back to receive a long pass. Charles got it again for three! Charles took it early in the clock and he got it!
After beating San Diego State in late February, BYU was 27-2 and positioned to make a run in the NCAA tournament. Then, just 3 days later, controversy engulfed the third-ranked Cougars and their starting center, Brandon Davies.
The decision was made by the university in athletics that Brandon would not be representing the university on the basketball team for this season.
Though BYU did not disclose any details, it was later reported that Davies was suspended for having premarital sex, a violation of the school's honor code. Now, a 20-year-old woman named J.C. Stephen has confirmed to Outside the Lines that she and Davies did have premarital sex. She also said she became pregnant. Both Stephen and Davies, who are no longer dating, have declined to be interviewed. Brigham Young University is owned and operated by the Mormon Church. All students must agree to obey the honor code, which insists they use clean language, abstain from alcoholic beverages, tobacco, tea, and coffee, observe specific dress and grooming standards, and live a chaste and virtuous life, including no premarital or extramarital sex. Enforcement is handled by the Honor Code Office, and students caught breaking the rules can face probation, suspension, or even dismissal.
If you don't live a lifestyle that adheres to the BYU Honor Code, there's other places to go.
BYU declined a request to interview the Honor Code Office director, but athletic director Tom Holmoe spoke on the school's behalf.
I don't have a problem with the people that would not adhere to the honor code, if not at BYU, and think that it's archaic. But the people at BYU, that's what makes it such a special place.
I like being held to a standard. That's just kind of how I look at it.
Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young is one of BYU's most famous alumni. He is also a descendant of Brigham Young himself.
It sets a standard for me. You know, I have a sense of what I want to try to accomplish in my life and what are those core beliefs, what are those core standards that I want to live by. So in that way, I'm very proud of the Honors Code, and I think it's a vital piece of the puzzle for BYU.
Young says he never struggled with the Honor Code, but other BYU athletes have found parts of the code to be challenging.
Well, it was probably the part that ended up getting me suspended from BYU. You know, it was the same thing that Brandon Davies had a problem with is, you know, the girls aspect.
In 1998, freshman forward McKelly Wesley averaged 13 points and 5 rebounds.
Wesley for 3.
After that season, he was kicked out of school when his fiancée, now his wife, became pregnant with their first son.
I got pulled into the Honor Code, and they asked me, "What's going on with you? Is your girlfriend pregnant? You know, we've heard a couple of things."
How did the Honor Code office hear his fiancée was pregnant? Wesley says he thinks 2 other male athletes, facing their own violations, turned him in.
There was a football player and a volleyball player, and I think what had happened was they got punished for having premarital sex, and went ahead and told the Honor Code, you know, we are kicked out for this. Yet McKelly has his fiancée or girlfriend pregnant, and he's allowed to stay in school.
Everybody's keeping an eye on everybody else and trying to hold them accountable.
Mary Winter was an assistant volleyball coach at BYU from 2002 to 2004. Before that, she played basketball and volleyball for the Cougars. When you signed the Honor Code at BYU, did you know exactly what you were being asked not to do?
Yeah, they make it very, very clear. Before you even sign the Honor Code, you have to get an ecclesiastical endorsement from your bishop, and they run through all the same questions that are basically on the Honor Code.
There is no bait and switch. When you're recruited at BYU, it's a big piece of the pie.
But if BYU athletes are clear on the Honor Code itself, Winter says the Honor Code office and how it enforces the code is extremely secretive.
For me, it was kind of like the KGB, sneaking around campus. You know, I had friends and heard of other people on campus that, you know, somebody came up to them and said, "You're swearing, you have to stop that, I'm from the Honor Code." Or, "Your shorts are too short, you need to go home and change."
My experience at BYU was great, really. I enjoyed the football program. I just think the Honor Code officers just ran like a circus, pretty much.
In 2006, defensive back Tico Pringle says he was suspended from school when an estranged ex-girlfriend told the Honor Code office he had forced her to have sex. Pringle says he was innocent, and a check of Utah State court records shows no criminal charges were filed. How much evidence did they have?
They had none. They couldn't come up with dates. They couldn't come up with times. They didn't want to take it to the legal system. They have their own set of rules. They do what they want to do.
Even back in the early 1980s, when Jim McMahon started BYU, the consistency and fairness of the Honor Code office was already being questioned. McMahon later said that he was caught breaking the Honor Code 3 times, twice for alcohol and once for tobacco, but each time he got probation. He said he was only dismissed for Honor Code violations after he played his final game as a senior. While school officials say that enforcement is stricter today than in McMahon's day, Pringle says he thinks that some BYU players still get more leeway than others.
I think the Honor Code office turns their back to some things that they hear. I mean, if it's, someone that they can see they really can't make too much of an example of, they might turn their back to it.
If somebody does something and only a few people know about it, they're more apt to keep it in-house, deal with them privately. But if the media gets a hold of it, BYU is going to come down hard and make a swift decision and judgment.
How consistently do you think the Honor Code has been enforced?
I think in my term as the athletic director, it's been consistent, but I have noticed differences. And the reason why is because the Honor Code takes every case individually. Different athletes with similar Honor Code violations, similar, not exactly, are treated a little bit differently depending on the individual case and the individual person.
At a school where less than 1% of the students are black, Pringle says he believes race is sometimes a factor in Honor Code enforcement.
The fact of the matter is, if you're black and you walk on campus, you're automatically going to have 10 more set of eyes looking at you. Or I know there's white guys that do the same exact stuff that the black people do. they don't get taken to the honor code office, and the honor code office just assumes that it's okay.
I think the first statement is probably true. We have 33,000 students at BYU, and predominantly those are Caucasian people. But I have not seen somebody in the honor code office go after somebody because of their race.
The issue of the honor code and race was pushed into the spotlight when Brandon Davies was suspended 2 weeks before the NCAA tournament. What role, if any, did racial politics play in his situation?
I don't know. If it were Jimmer, would it be different?
What do you think?
I don't know. It could have been. It very well could have been.
Do you think race is a factor at all when it comes to how the honor code is enforced?
Boy, that's a touchy subject, but, you know, looking back, it's hard to pick out a whole bunch of, you know, Caucasian athletes who have been kicked out. All the ones that come to mind are, you know, Polynesian descent or African-American descent.
Outside the Lines asked BYU for a list of sanctioned athletes and their race. BYU declined, saying student records are private.
Kelly Wesley's going to try a three.
Big basket by Wesley.
Not all athletes who get suspended for breaking the honor code leave BYU for good. Following Wesley's suspension, he returned and later won Mountain West Conference Player of the Year. Today, this BYU graduate says he still has conflicted feelings about the honor code.
No, I think the honor code is kind of a necessary evil. You know, you've got to have standards that you stick by, and BYU has received some praise for, you know, sticking to their guns when a lot was on the line for an athletic program. But I feel that, you know, at what expense to the person.
That's Steve Delson reporting. Brandon Davies withdrew from the school in late April after completing the winter semester, but he's trying to work his way back. School officials say Davies is trying to meet a series of conditions established by his bishop, who, if he makes those conditions, will recommend Davies for readmission in the fall. If he is readmitted, he'll be able to rejoin the team. Well, let's talk about this. We'll bring in a panel to discuss it. Mark Madsen is a member of the LDS Church, and he played 10 seasons in the NBA. Trevor Maddich played football at BYU, spent 12 seasons in the NFL. Darron Smith is an assistant professor in the College of Health Professions at Wichita State University, and he was an adjunct instructor at BYU from 1995 to 2005. He's also the author of Black and Mormon. And we bring in ESPN's own Herm Edwards, spent more than 30 years in the NFL as a player and coach. Thanks all of you for being with us. Trevor, when we listened to that piece, you heard several former athletes at that school say that they felt that the honor code was not applied the same to everyone. What did you think as someone who went there hearing that?
Well, I was disappointed. In my experience, it was applied equally to everybody. And whether it's an athlete or a non-athlete, LDS, non-LDS, and no matter what race. It's all about individual choices with the honor code. You choose to come to BYU and be a part of that environment. If you run afoul of the honor code at some point, which many people do, because it is a very lofty standard, then part of the honor code office's role is not to kick you out, it's to find ways to keep you in, and that's another personal choice. As an individual, you can choose to get back on track, or you can choose that you don't like it and enjoy your college experience elsewhere. But it always was applied to an individual individually, and not to a group, whether they're LDS or not, regardless of what their race may be.
Herm Edwards, when you were coming out of high school and being recruited, you were saying before that you were recruited by BYU. What was your experience when you visited with them, and what did they tell you about what life would be like on campus?
Well, I respected Lavelle Edwards, the head coach there, and I actually took a recruiting visit up there in 1972 coming out of high school. And really, we discussed a little bit about the honor code, but more of anything else at that point in time, you know, back in the day, my hair was a lot longer. I had a big afro. I had a mustache. And the first thing the conversation Lavelle and myself had was, hey, you know, we don't allow mustaches, the grooming part of the hair. And that didn't bother me so much, you know. But I think after walking around the campus, just visiting with other athletes there, socially, you know, I felt I wasn't going to really fit. And that's not saying that the honor code was going to bother me, because I was bused going to high school. So I went to a predominantly white high school. So that wasn't going to bother me at all. But I looked at myself and said, hey, you know, I really want to be a Pac-8 player. It was a Pac-8 then, not the Pac-10. And socially, I probably wasn't going to fit there, so I decided to go to Cal instead. That's kind of different. BYU, Cal, a little bit different.
University of California, Berkeley might be considered a little different by most standards. Darron Smith, you taught at BYU. You were not an athlete. You heard what Trevor had to say about, that in his experience the code was enforced equally, but you heard those students. When you were on that campus, what was your experience?
Well, I think Trevor's right and he's wrong. I think that if you look at BYU and the issues that we're talking about from through the prism of white experience, it would appear that all things are equal. However, when we did our observational study, we saw a very, very different story there. We saw essentially student athletes, at least in terms of since 1993, there were some 70 athletes that were dismissed from BYU, and about 60% of them were African Americans, and about 14 players total were Polynesian. So there was a disproportionate amount of African American students and Polynesian students that were actually dismissed. So I actually don't agree with Trevor in terms of the issue of it being an individual idea. It is, but it isn't, because obviously if you look at the data suggests that there's a group process going on.
Well, the school itself has not released numbers. So the observational study you talked about, of course, comes from anecdotal reports from media accounts that a number of people looked into. It said, do not look at all the numbers. But Trevor, to get back to you, as somebody raised in the church and somebody who went to the university, this was a school. This was a fact that until 1978, African Americans could not hold the priesthood. It's something that the church struggled with since then. While you were on campus, how did the university deal with that issue of its racial history and its desire to move beyond what it before had held to be doctrine?
When I was on campus, it was dealt with by moving forward. It wasn't dealt with from a standpoint of bringing people aside and discussing it so much as treating everybody the same. See, football is a meritocracy. The person next to you is suffering and bleeding and playing in pain, playing with injuries that require surgery after the season. And it becomes your humanity, not your race and not your religion. And it was always about your humanity, your desire to work with your teammates, for your teammates, and your desire to fit in at BYU. Now, you don't fit in at BYU because you shoehorn yourself in there. You fit in at BYU because that's the kind of lifestyle you want to live anyway. And so from a standpoint of how it's dealt with, in my experience, it's been dealt with by treating everybody equally by the content of their character and moving forward.
Mark, you grew up in the LDS church. You went to Stanford, however, not BYU. While you were there, you're trying to live by the same code, but you don't have an honor code office that is helping enforce that code. What was it like as a Mormon student on that campus, not too far from where Herm went to college, trying to choose the right, as you say in the church?
Well, I think that whether it's Stanford or whether it's playing in the NBA, and whether you're Mormon, of another faith or of any faith, I think there's many student athletes that fall within the bounds of living within the honor code, whether, again, of any faith, and those that would not. And again, it's all up to the individual. I was interested in the observational study, and I think that's a great study that's been cited here today already. And initially, I'll tell you my honest and candid thoughts, and I'll take Brandon Davies as an example. My understanding of the honor code at BYU is that in order to acknowledge the violation of the honor code, it involves someone to do that, to acknowledge it. And so when I see that 60% number of African Americans and then the number of Pacific Islanders, I see individuals of tremendous character and individuals that, again, part of the honor code process is acknowledging the violation of the honor code. And so I actually view this a little bit differently in the sense of these individuals stepped up and said, hey, I signed the honor code, and yeah, there was an infraction. And so I really view that in a positive light towards those individuals that have been involved with honor code violations.
Herm, let me ask you, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to just comment. I understand the emphasis is on the individual responsibility. I get that. And I also, as a practicing member of the church myself, I can appreciate the fact that the honor code is nothing more than an extension of Mormon theology. So when we're recruiting African American players to attend BYU, these are young men and women in most cases who don't have or who have not been exposed to the rigors of an honor code system. And what BYU hasn't done is create the conditions whereby these young men can be successful. So, I mean, expecting them to adhere to some sort of an individual standard based on, someone being my brother's or sister's keeper is extremely problematic. And the school has not done much, at least since 2004, to address that. Now, they have recently, but during the time from 2004 to the time when Bronco took over, there was essentially nothing that was being done other than a couple of anecdotal heres and anecdotal theres. So you got to remember that it's not just about individual acts, but it's about a group phenomena as well, because the data wouldn't show, the data would show otherwise, and I disagree. Observational study is a type of knowledge that needs to be acknowledged for this particular issue.
Trevor, would you like to respond?
Well, I see it differently. Here's the process of recruiting relative to the honor code. When a coach meets a potential recruit, the first thing he talks about in the first meeting is the honor code. Then, on the recruiting visit to BYU's campus, that recruit meets with a representative from the honor code office to discuss what it means to follow the honor code. Then, he must speak with a Mormon bishop and go through an interview process about the honor code. Whether or not they're LDS, they still have to meet with an LDS bishop who has an intimate knowledge of the honor code. After that, there's another conversation with another LDS clergyman or the university chaplain about the honor code. That is 4 separate conversations about the honor code during the recruiting process.
Trevor, that came in later, though. That came in later.
3 of those are by people who have nothing to do with the athletic program. Now, you are right that with Tom Holmoe as athletic director, Bronco Mendenhall and Dave Rose as coaches of the football and basketball programs, they have amped that up. But at the same time, I was recruited to BYU well before 2004. And one of the first things they made clear to me was the honor code. And the reason is that they don't want players to conform to the honor code. They want players who embrace the honor code, and Bronco Mendenhall, the football coach, has actually turned away elite athletes that are now playing at other programs who wanted to come to BYU, but Bronco didn't feel that they would be a good fit. They embrace the honor code, and therefore they are very above board with it.
All right, let me bring Mark back in really quickly. Sorry, Darron, we only have a little bit of time, but Mark, let me just raise that one question that did come up in that piece. Is the idea of an honor code itself archaic?
I actually think it's not archaic. You know, right now we're talking about BYU and we're talking about the Mormon Church, but hey, let's look at a guy like AC Green who played in the NBA 15, 20 years. I mean, AC was very vocal about his beliefs in abstinence before marriage. I can tell you of other guys in the NBA that other players that, you know, hold true and strong to their religious faith, whatever it might be. The NBA is full of individuals of tremendous religious faith, and some of whom fall into the belief of not having premarital relationships.
All right, Mark, I'm sorry to cut you off there. I'm afraid we're out of time. Gentlemen, I appreciate a vigorous conversation. Mark Madsen, Trevor Matich, Darron Smith, and Herm Edwards, thank all of you for joining us. If you want to keep this conversation going and share your own thoughts on today's or any of our stories, check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/OTL. And we are Moments from the Sports Reporters. Stay with us.